Welcome to Make It Plain from Make Plain Jesus Ministries, featuring Pastor James Bryan, where we take biblical truths in everyday situations and break them down to be as plain as possible. So, stay tuned and enjoy the broadcast.
Welcome to this episode of Make It Plain. I'm excited right now that I'm able to come and talk about another topic, another moment for us to consider just some of the truths the Lord has for us in everyday living. And you know, it's interesting when we talk about these different topics that, yes, there are things that we have to remember when it comes to the church, but really it deals with everything that we're doing in every part of our life. So these truths are what I call news you can use. They're usable, they're practical, and that's the purpose of this podcast. So today, in this episode, we want to talk about every age has a place. Every age has a place. And when I think about that and I look around, and unlike times in the past, there's more awareness that there are different generations that are intermingling and working together, because that's how a society develops. There's more awareness based on the numerous news reports and the articles and blogs and everything else about the challenges that different generations have and kind of the expectations that every generation has. Now, even if it wasn't known, or maybe every generation didn't quite fit into a category, based on all the news reports, everyone else now feels they must fit in that category. And so as I talk about this topic, I want you to understand that it could be that you're in one generation, but your values align more to a different one. And that's okay, because no one is really in a box all the time. You know, when I look at the reports and all, they talk about the Gen X, they talk about the Gen Y, Gen Z, they talk about millennials, they talk about baby boomers, or even talk about the generation before, which called themselves the greatest generation. And so basically all that is titles put to age groups. And so based on their experiences, it's based on the influences of the environments in which they grew up in, it formed a type of thinking, a type of consideration, and type of work ethics and expectations. And it changed based on the generations and based on those experiences. So one of the things that we today have to realize on every day that we go to work, every day that we're at home, every day that we're at the grocery store and so on, that we have to understand the different groups and understand the different expectations and see how that relates to you and how you can relate to the other ones. And so when you do that, you find common ground. So, you know, when I watch the news, and I won't name the outlets and things like that, but I see some that always highlight that someone will talk when they come behind an older person and said, "Okay, boomer," as if to say whatever. And so then you will find some of the other generations say, "Those millennials, they don't do this, they don't look at this, they don't understand." Or it's always these particular, not necessarily derogatory, but more of a put down from generation to generation. But I want you to understand something, at least from my life experiences, and if you were physically right here, I would ask you yours. But from my life experiences, I get joy in working with people from all different generations. And I know I'm not alone, because you can always learn something from someone with different experiences, from different backgrounds, and at different ages. When I've worked in different secular roles, I cherished having work groups or teams that were made up of people of different ages and that wanted to work together. You see, it's a challenge if you have people of different ages and all they want to think about is their own perspective, because then you can't get much benefit from that. You can't get much advancement. But I want you to know that really everybody has something to offer. Everyone fits. Every age has a place. Think about it this way. The ones who are older have been through experiences that some of the younger ones have not experienced yet. So if you look at the greatest generation, and there are fewer and fewer of those at this point in time, they went through World War II. Well, we haven't done that. and we didn't see those experiences that were building up to it, and how everyone had to come together regardless of background and begin to work together. That everyone, regardless of ethnicity and everything else, had a key role in victory during World War II. And so you realize that during that time, whether people wanted to deal with it or not, or come and tell you about it, there are points that every age had to come together then to help make sure that the country, the allies, and everyone else won. If you look at the generation that followed, you'll realize that in that generation, they had to deal with other things politically. That's when civil rights came to a head, and all the other things, and how they dealt with it may be a little bit different than how we look at it right now. How they were able to persevere is different. And generations that came afterwards that were born in the time that where technology became a mainstream part of their life. But the older generations didn't have that, so they have to rely on the younger ones to kind of bring them up to speed. You see what I mean? It really takes all of us working together to make sure that this works out well. Even biblically, it even talks about these things. And I would invite you that when you do read the Bible or listen to the Bible, however you get access to it, I want you to look at it differently, because in it, not only are there, as some people say, rules and regulations, but there's so many truths, and then you begin to see the personalities that are involved, and you begin to realize that these are people that were very ordinary, that God put his extra on top of that to make it extraordinary. So think about it this way. When you read about Abram in the book of Genesis, what was going on with him before he started appearing in the book? No one knows, right? And so it was at some point in time that he began to realize that there is a God. He might not have known everything about it. He might not have had the experience, but he started realizing there's something different. The truth is different than what everyone else had been teaching him. And so it was at that point of realization that the Lord began to move him and use him. But you realize that when he became prominent and you realize the exploits and other things that God was doing, all of this was later in life, not earlier in life. And so he had built up a number of experiences. And as he built up those experiences, God used them. And so God will show up at different times to show his faithfulness to him. God will show up at different times to rescue him. God would give him just these strategies that he needed to be victorious. And all of those encounters, or all of those situations that he went through, began to define who he really is in his relationship with God. And it was those experiences that he tried to give to his nephew, that he tried to give to his whole household and those that followed. And so it was in that case, the older then trying to give wisdom to the younger. And so in a lot of cases today, we see that, because I always knew, and many of you are similar to me in this case, I like being around folks that were older than me. The reason is because in their stories or in their conversations, I may not agree with everything, but I will always learn something from the conversation because they had experiences that I didn't have. And so because of that, there was this learning going back and forth. And after they heard that I noticed that I was listening, they would share more and more. And then I would be able to insert some things there and they would learn. And so it became a great relationship where we could learn from one another. How awesome is that, right? God designed it to be that way. But see, if I'd gone in and just said, you have nothing to teach me, then all I would end up doing is repeating the same mistakes that their prior group had done. Biblically speaking, you read about Timothy in the New Testament. Well, Timothy was young, but he was set up to pastor a church in Ephesus, and he was set up to lead people. But he was younger than all of them. But over time, based on his anointing and authority and everything else that he learned, well, Paul told him to study to show yourself to be approved. In other words, know what you're doing. Understand what I've given you and let them see it working effectually in you. And so because of that, he had people that were following him that were older than him. But he actually learned something in this, is that he learned how to relate to folks that were older, giving them respect and still teaching and feeding and having that interaction. So they were learning from him, the younger, but he was also respecting and actually just understanding and acknowledging who they are and their experiences. So it began to work out. And so that's how it should be even now. I would say that everybody who is a millennial has something to teach a baby boomer. But I would also say that baby boomers have something to teach millennials. But you have to understand in those two generations in this example, how the world appears is different, and that has to be understood. But that's not necessarily a bad thing or something that would cause a problem. It is a good thing because the perspectives together gives a whole full answer on how to approach problems and situations when you are actually taking into account just the viewpoints of each and then coming up with a solution that addresses it. That's how God intended all of it to work, because every age really does have a place. So think about it today when everyone is angry about anything and everything, and I'm not even going into what's right, what's wrong. That's not the point. But the point is there are different viewpoints. If you only are used to being around folks that are carbon copies of you, then you need to actually be exposed to folks that are not. You still may not agree, but you can understand the interactions and find a common ground to interact. I would also tell you that if I go into the church, oftentimes we have spent so much time separating based on denomination and everything else. Now, I know you're going to say, James, are you trying to tell us to compromise our faith and our beliefs? No, I'm not trying to tell you to do that. But you have to understand that even while you're on this earth, you have to interact with other people. So how can you interact with every possible means of a peaceable interaction? How can you show love to someone else who doesn't know what love is? And so that's what you're supposed to do. That's what I'm supposed to do. And that's why it's okay to be able to interact with other folks at all times. Now, when I think about this, I would love for us to get to the place where even though people may be at different age groups and all, we don't assume that they don't know this or they're going to have this response just because they look like they're in a certain age. Even people that were born in certain time periods doesn't mean that they fit the description of that particular generation or that label that was given to them. But you know, there might be a nugget of inspiration in your conversation with them. There might be a point where you learn something from them. There are many people that are younger than I am that I speak with, and I learn different perspectives and different things, which I think is fabulous. But there are people that are older than me, and again, I'm one that likes to listen and learn. So for me, I'm absorbing all of this and understanding some things that otherwise I would never understand. What about you? I would challenge that as you even listen to this podcast, think about it this way. Even from a geographic perspective, there are different assumptions and things that may be in your mind just based on the geographical area where you live. So they always say the West Coast is different from the East Coast. And in some cases it's probably true, but not in others. They always said, or people always say that some of the Midwesterners are different from people down south. I don't know if that's true, but maybe it is. But when you have that type of interaction, then you're able to know that everybody really does have a place, especially based on ages. We don't want to go through life, I would say this to you, repeating the same thing over and over from generation to generation just because we don't want to listen to one another. We don't want to go through life trying to find the solution to the same problems just because we don't want to follow through with what the generation before did. I've seen many companies in which every time they get new leadership, they want to throw out everything that's ever been done by their predecessor without looking and at least assessing what was good and what was bad, and then building off of that. And so the companies that I've seen that don't build like that repeat the same mistake over and over and over and never really make the progress that they had hoped they would make. So we have to get in this point of learning. We have to get in this point of understanding that age itself is not something that is a predictor of whether something will be successful or not. Don't write somebody off just because they look too young, too old, or somewhere in between. Get to know them and see if they're qualified for what you want them to do. Or if it's a social interaction, just begin to open your mouth and speak. That's the best way. Listen to the accounts of those that have gone through things and learn from that. And those who have had so much experience in life, listen to those that are much younger, because the viewpoints they have may shortcut so many things that you're trying to deal with now. It's only together can you come through with great results and increased quality of life and just an understanding where there's caring going back and forth. Growing up, I learned a lot about work from folks that were older than me. But then I had to apply those principles to a new world that worked differently during my time. Same thing should be for those that are much younger than I am. That the principles even that I learned can be applied to the world in which they work right now. When you do it that way, then every age has a place, an interaction, a learning ability, a point of contribution. Every age can give so that all of us can move forward. That's the thing that I want to leave with you today. I want you to understand and consider the gold mine of help and wisdom and inspiration that is right in front of you. I want you to consider all the things that are possible because of those folks from diverse age groups that are there, that you can just go up and ask, so what do you think? How did you do this? How did that work during your time? And then apply those principles to our time. Everybody has a voice that matters and at least can contribute should they choose to. We just have to make sure that we do that. Now, how we introduce ourselves and respect ourselves to one another is so important. I would tell you practically as I get ready to wind this down, if you go up to somebody and say, hey, how are you? And you begin to have a conversation. So I would like to understand about this some more. That opens the door for them to begin to talk and to share. Again, you don't have to agree with everything, but if you do that, you'll at least get some nuggets of wisdom out of the conversation. If you write them off and just say, I don't want to talk to you, you have nothing that you can offer me, then you're in a point where you're going to miss these valuable nuggets that can help you along. Company cultures are ones that theoretically are built upon a common theme, but really within every culture, there are all these subcultures and subgroups that are there. And all of them have, I would say, different goals and objectives. And hopefully they all align to the overall goal and objective, but not necessarily in every case. So how do you deal with the friction that may be between one department and another? Does that friction prevent the whole group from moving forward? These are questions you got to ask. If you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you want to be a successful manager in your department, if you want to be a successful CEO, you got to understand the people that work for you and what their motivations are and the type of people that work best for your vision. But usually I would tell you, if you only have a large block of one type of age group, you're missing so much more in another area. And so that's what you have to understand. Every age has value. Every age group has a place. Everybody can contribute. Everyone can motivate each other and then go from there. So with all of that being said, I want you to think about a couple of things today. And I just want to leave you with these points to think about. First of all, if you work with anyone else, whether it's in a church ministry, whether it is in your own business, whether it's for a corporation or some other group, I want you to think about how you interact with them. Are there people that you are just excluding based on age because you've gotten into the rut of saying that I just want to be with the folks that are my group because they understand me better? I would challenge you to say, reach out to even groups that you haven't yet and just try to find a way to have conversations and a relationship of sharing of ideas. It would benefit you and open up your mind. In some cases, it's going to frustrate you because initially you may not agree with anything, but over time you'll find something that you do. If you're much younger and you work in some group and you find that the people that are older than you just dismiss you, well, find a way to have a conversation with them and ask them questions about, well, what is it about the things that we do at our age that maybe are a challenge? Or find some kind of common ground that you can begin to have a conversation. You'll learn some things, you'll get some principles, and then you apply it to your everyday life. These are just general points of encouragement on this particular podcast that I want you to understand in your practical life. If you do that, your church will go strong. If you do that, your business will grow strong. If you do that, you will go stronger because you are now beginning to capture rich, life-giving examples. So with that being said, if this has been a blessing for you, just a positive, practical food for thought, I want you just to send us a message and let us know. If this is something that you can use and you try it and it begins to work out for you, reach out to us and just let us know, because we try to give various types of topics that will help you, both church-related and non-church related, but really just life-related. And so we hope this has been a blessing, and may God bless you until the next episode